Greetings to all of you who have joined us for this Surplus Trust Policy Dialogue Forum. Today we are looking at Zimbabwe, and for good reasons. There's already turmoil, one might say, and there would be a rerun of 2017, some would say. We're looking at struggles within the struggle, unpacking the 2030 agenda. The background is as follows. The internecine conflict in ZANU, the liberation movement itself, from the outset, has always been characterized by struggles within a struggle. Power struggles, succession struggles. And it would appear the current one is no different, although, of course, with different dimensions, different implications, given the different historical conjuncture that we find ourselves in now, in 2025. And even there could be critical differences between the 2017 scenario and what is unfolding in front of us right now. We want to interrogate, first of all, what are the origins of the 2030 agenda? What is it? Is it simply a reflection of what Ali Mazrui, writing in the 60s already, described as the monarchical tendency in African politics? The tendency towards a one-party state or one-party leader, one-party state, the idea of a life presidency, which was in vogue for much of the 60s and even 70s. And one would argue that even in the Zimbabwean context, Mugabe himself was given to that monarchical tendency. Clearly, he had no intention of leaving. And even those that thought that Maya Mujuru would have succeeded him in 2014 were shocked when the games were played around Mrs. Mujuru. And in the end, Mugabe had his way. Joyce Mujuru and her clique were shunted aside, and in the confusion, sneaked in Emerson Mnangagwa. The rest is history. So, it would appear that Mnangagwa is also trying to do play the same card, albeit with less skill, less charisma, and indeed less clout, if not also legitimacy, less legitimacy in doing so. So, then we have seen almost unprecedented convulsions within the party itself, ZANU-PF, reaching a climax over almost 2 weeks ago, when a group of war veterans, led by one Blessing Geza, and including some struggle stalwarts like Gwawia and Shipoera from the Zipa days, almost a reincarnation, one would say, of the struggle days themselves. And with the repeat broadcast this Sunday, one cannot help describe the challenge, the gauntlet that has been thrown up by Geza and his group as nothing less than daring, if not also impunity. And It has got the whole of Zimbabwe enthralled, excited in some quarters, and indeed anxiety in many, not to mention the ruling circles of ZANU-PF itself and the state. There's probable panic. There's a kind of a helplessness in the face of the defiance and the gauntlet that Geza and his colleagues, his comrades have thrown. And what we have here now is almost certainly something loading. We don't know what it is, whether it's a coup, whether it's forces that will force Emerson Mnangagwa to capitulate or end up in some kind of a scuffle, if not a bloody exchange in the next few days and weeks. We don't know. We don't know whether our panel here can help us interrogate and analyze and unpack what's happening in front of us. Whatever the case we are, someone suggested that maybe the title, Struggles Within a Struggle, is not appropriate. We should title this discussion Crisis Within a Crisis. Whatever it is, we are indeed in a crisis. So we have here 3 Zimbabweans, all of whom are familiar with the Zimbabwean political terrain, all of whom are well known in terms of the national discourse over the years, all of whom are opinion makers. Tony Rila from Rao, but also a co-founder with me of the Platform for Concerned Citizens. We have been at it since 2016. A whistle in the wind, some people would say, positing the National Transitional Authority as a possible mechanism for a very intractable Zimbabwean situation. There were Tendai Biti, who needs no introduction. Tendai is almost indispensable in the political discourse in our country. And then Jana Ube, very active in the NGO sector and a veritable voice in our national discourse. We'll start with Tony Rila to outline the problematic for us. And then Tendai would lay in, and last but not least, Jana Ube. Tony.
Thank you, Ibo, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, maybe. I think we end up on this platform all too often posing problematics and too often without any kind of solution. When Ibo asked me to talk about this, I thought long and hard about trying to frame this. And it struck me, and maybe David can put up the first transparency. It struck me that there's an elephant in the room when we start to discuss why these transitions and these internal transitions, and they've been going on a long time, as Ibo said, why are these continuing to happen again and again and again? In fact, the elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is about 6 of them. And they all link to something that I think is really critical in this latest push to remain in power. This push to push a presidential term beyond its legitimate level all the way to 2030. And what is this all about? And the elephant in the room is about accountability. Why do you hold on to power? This is one aspect of the problem. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know all the answers of this, but I've been working on this problem about accountability for a very, very long time. Okay, so David, just go back quickly. I just want to flag these. And I want to point out that this elephant in the room is such an enormous elephant, and we don't talk about it, and every single government avoids it utterly and completely because of its implications for political power and for its implications for the government in charge. Now, this goes all the way back pre-independence, and it's very important to look at that. And I've chosen this title deliberately because it is my belief, based on all the evidence, that one of the key factors in pushing this transition, because they're pushing a transition, no doubt, whether it comes to fruition or not, and we're going to unpack that, they're pushing a transition in maintaining political power again. It's to basically continue the life of a parliament all the way to 2030, to continue the life of a president all the way to 2030. This is a transition similar to things like we saw in 2008 and leading into the so-called government of national unity. So it starts with the Liberation War. Now, I just very quickly want to make these points about the title, War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity. It's important. Thanks, David. War crimes are very important. What happened in 1980 is that quite clearly war crimes committed by the colonial regime were brushed under the carpet. Now, I'm not saying there weren't other kinds of crimes happened, but at that particular time, war crimes were forgotten. And those war crimes were extremely serious, okay? But these crimes happened in the context of war, and nobody would dispute that Zimbabwe or Rhodesia at that particular time was in a war. But there are also things called crimes against humanity. Thanks, David. And I'm not going to go through these things in great detail. These apply to situations where there is no war and where gross human rights violations are taking place as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. And this is what characterizes Zimbabwe from 1980 onwards. Okay, next one, quickly. Okay, in the Liberation War, all of these forms of war crimes are documented. The documentary evidence is clear. Massacres took place in Mozambique and Zambia. Torture and inhuman treatment was massive in Rhodesia at that particular time. Next slide, please. These things I'm going through quickly. You can read quickly, folks. What we found in the Liberation War, when we did this research in the 90s, that 1 in 10 persons over 30 years was a torture survivor, whom we only saw in the 1990s, okay? And these consequences that you can see up there about literacy, unemployment, etc., these are findings that happen every time gross human rights violations take place in this country, right? 1 in 10 people over 30 years was a torture survivor, and they had enormous consequences for them. Nobody looked at them, and they didn't look at them because we did not deal with war crimes in 1980. And remember that that war was based around legitimate challenge to a treasonous government that tore up a constitution with the British government. Okay, the people who fought for it were called terrorists and not freedom fighters. That was the title they gave themselves, and the entire country was convulsed by war crimes. Okay, next one. Okay, the next one very quickly, Gukurahundi, and I'm not going to spend a long time on this, is so much in the press about this, okay? It is undoubtedly that every aspect, okay, well, I've taken some of the aspects out because they don't apply to Gukurahundi, but every one of these features of Gukurahundi is documented for what happened between 82 and 87. And the consequences to the victims, the ones that I've just talked about, we found 5 in 10 people over 18 years were tortures with a clinical disorder. That's very serious. We're now then talking about not just 20,000 dead, we're talking 5 in 10 people. We're probably talking about half the population of Marabiraland North-South. and the lower Midlands. Next slide, please. Okay, now we get to a much crunchier issue. And this is very much, and if the first, what I was saying about Gukurahundi is relevant, that was a challenge for political power. It was, as Ibo was talking about, in the drive in so many countries towards a one-party state, the elimination of political opposition, that was clearly important in Gukurahundi. Ended in 87 with the Unity Accord, and once again, the forgetting of everything. But since then, we have had 3 elections, 2000, 2002, and 2008. Each of these elections, in my view, and the data, and corroborated by many other people, would constitute a crime against humanity, in the sense that these things I'm describing on the slide here, murder, imprisonment, or torture, rape, persecution, enforced disappearances, happened on a widespread and systematic process scale, right? It was widespread right across the country in each of these elections. It was systematic in the sense that they were targeted against the members of a political party, and not just the members of the political party, anybody who did not show positive affiliation to ZANU-PF, right? So here we have 3 elections that would conform to crimes against humanity. Next one, please, David. Finally, the last one, and this is very interesting, Operation Marambachina. What was important about that was the notion that this constituted a crime against humanity was raised by the UN Special Rapporteur, Anna Tibajewuka, in her report about the consequences of Operation Marambachina. And according to crimes against humanity, the effects of it were catastrophic, right? There was no doubt that this was forced displacement of people out of their homes. And that was confirmed by a very erudite legal opinion by Oxford Pro Bono Publica group, who categorically said this is a crime against humanity. And what we found, what researchers found when they looked at Operation Marambachina, and those of you remember, it was nearly 1 million people displaced during that time. 69%, nearly 70% of those people on a study that was done then by Action Aid and others showed a clinically significant psychological disorder, okay? On shelter, source of income, the effects on the population were catastrophic. So we now have 6 large elephants. Now, what's the meaning of those large elephants? Crimes against humanity destroy a country's future. There's no doubt about that. They silence people, they disrupt communities, they impoverish people. They have such a wide range of effect that it is no joke to be able to say that we have 1 million traumatized people in our country, of old all the way through to the young. Now, this may all sound like boring history and nothing to do with 2020-30, but this is the legacy that a government carries from 1980 to 2025. The consequences of these crimes against humanity are that accountability is demanded. Now, the push by civil society to document everything that's happened since independence and what happened during the Liberation War was so significant that the government had to accede in 2013 in the Constitution to put in place a National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. And what you can see is that Peace and Reconciliation Commission was subverted, undermined, lived 10 years and produced nothing except contention and serious problems within Matabeleland about how they were addressing Gukurahundi. So, next slide, David. So what's to be done? And this is what's going forward. What needs to be done? I'm going to come back to Ibo's question at the end of this. Firstly, every single time we have these crimes against humanity, what is the result is impunity. And impunity has a fundamentally destructive effect on the country, which we see day by day. It destroys the rule of law utterly and completely, because the accountability for the most serious crimes, and the people in charge right now, and certainly the faction that's pushing very hard to continue, they're implicated in this. Nobody is immune from this problem. Okay, so the rule of law is never established in international law unless these impunity must end. But there's also practical impunity. Now, the impunity, the formal impunity is the quick and is the easy way to avoid things. For example, if you have the NPRC, you have a domestic remedy, and so you can't go anywhere else. And the extent to which this government, all the way through, whether it was under Robert Mugabe or under Emerson Mnangagwa, avoids this accountability can be seen by their attitude to the SADC tribunal. As quickly as they could, they got rid of the SADC tribunal because there was an outside body to which we could and did take serious crimes, and the courts ruled in favor of the applicants, both on land, but particularly on gross human rights violations. But they back it up, it's backed up with what I would call practical impunity, and that is the failure to investigate genuine crimes in the country. This has been going on since 2000. The lawyers will tell you endlessly that the number of people who've had serious crimes committed against them have gone to the police, have never ever been investigated, no finding, nobody was prosecuted, to the extent that what human rights organizations had to do is they had to go the expensive and laborious route of going to the courts and seeking civil remedy. That was the only way we could hold the government to account for the gross human rights violations that took place. So that practical impunity, allied to the fact that the courts are reluctant to get involved in the complicated issues around challenging impunity, it undermines the entire judicial system. So a genuine accountability system must be put in place. Now, these rules have been known since the 1990s, about 1993. Everybody knows them. They're called the Zwane principles. And what they say is when you've had gross human rights violations, crimes against humanity, an accountability system must ensure the following rights. Okay? The right to truth. You have to tell the truth about what's going on. That means survivors and victims must be able to tell their story. Now, they can't, and I can tell you, if the hundreds of thousands of people told their story, Zimbabwe would be in trauma. You have to have the right to justice. People have to have redress for what happened. You have to have reparations for the losses they have. And you have to have the right to non-recurrence. That means that people responsible may not hold office, and the institution responsible for it do it. Now, these 6 elephants don't go away. They ride with this government in whatever form and whatever faction. They carry them with them every single time, at every single election. If they lose power, they will be made to be accountable for this. Now, I would suggest this is a powerful motivation for Emerson Mnangagwa and many around him for avoiding the inevitable consequence of losing power. It's why they will not contemplate losing an election. It's why they know they would not like an election in 2028. The evidence out there says that no person in the whole country, virtually, supports a 3rd term. No Zimbabweans, more than 3/4 of them, have ever supported the notion of a 3rd term. It goes all the way back throughout the 2000s. We understand, and I understand from some of the things that were said by the war veterans, that not even a majority of ZANU-PF supporters even support this. So there is a motive to continue in power. Because one of the things that happens when you challenge on crimes against humanity is command responsibility. Those who are in charge are responsible for what the people do on the ground. It's quite clear. And this is an accountability problem that is going to stare these people in the face. And I suggest, amongst many, many other factors, and notwithstanding there's quite clearly a very serious conflict, the conflict, in my view, right now, has every single feature of the problems that we saw leading up to 2017. It's so similar, it's not true. I saw a slide, a podcast by somebody who was supposedly speaking for the military, where they specifically said, this is exactly what we dealt with in 2017. And what's very serious in this thing, and I've been saying this for a long time, and I was shocked to hear in this podcast that that's really understood by the military, if this person was speaking for the military, that the decision made by George Chiweshi in 2017 in his order that the military were entitled to intervene in Zimbabwe was a legitimate interpretation of the Constitution in Section 212. Section 212 says, in event of a threat, the military must act in event of a threat to the Constitution or the nation. It should mean, what that means or should mean is that the military must back the order of the president to defend the Constitution and the nation. This interpretation says that the military have a prima facie de jure right to intervene if they think there's a threat to the Constitution or the nation. And I would say, if you're looking at the context right now of the collapsing economy, the severe deprivation that the vast majority of the population are facing, which was spoken to by the spokespersons for the war veterans, okay, and the threat to the Constitution, whatever they're saying, amending the Constitution in this particular way is a threat to the Constitution, right? You're wanting to amend the Constitution for the right to continue in power to avoid these consequences. That, in my view, is one of the elephants in the room. Now, I know my colleagues are going to talk about a whole range of other elephants in the room. But I would suggest that what lies below this is not merely the anger that the populace has against the government because of the deprivation they face, of the untrammeled looting and corruption that they see, but the anger they feel for how they have been brutalized directly and indirectly. You must remember that certainly in every one of those five elephants that I'm talking about, they happened not in some Uruguayan torture cell. They happened in the community. They were witnessed by people. People were terrorized by watching their loved ones be tortured and abused. So the population has been challenged immensely by this violence and remains extremely angry. And there's a big problem that we have to face in that. And where will that anger go? And how do you subvert that? Thank you, Ivo.
Hey, Tony, are you done?
I'm done.
Yeah, just a number of two questions I have. Well, the first is, are you aware that in the history of transitions or peace settlements, if you can talk about that, such as Lancaster, for example, even the Unity Accord of 1987, that the victims of torture, victims of atrocities such as you have outlined, are often sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. If you
Absolutely.
remember in the Lancaster, to the shock of many of us who were seated there, there was amnesty as a necessary precondition for the settlement and indeed for the way forward. And you saw the same thing in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So what makes you think that the powers that be, the incumbent government, should have anything to fear given this precedence? What is it?
No, that's the perennial problem, isn't it? Is the price of peace is usually amnesty, but it isn't always. Right? You cut a deal to make sure that peace will happen, and each one of these steps has revealed, I believe, to the populace that every single one of these deals has not solved the problem. It has led to further violence. That's the issue. You push for it, we support the notion, we'll all go for 2030, or what we'll do is we'll have an internal agreement within ZANU-PF of some kind. The factions will unite because they have to, given the argument I've just made, and we'll continue. Or if we decide that we have to step down, we will demand an amnesty or else. And it's always that gun to the head, or else it continues. Now,
what I mean there is that, therefore, I don't believe that Mnangagwa in particular has nothing to fear in the knowledge that precedents have all shown that amnesty was a precondition for any settlement.
Yeah,
and I doubt that in any transition that might come in Zimbabwe, that the issue of the massive record of atrocities would be something that would be leveled against Mnangagwa as one of the main architects of Gukurahundi. Do you think this will come to that, or do you think that it will be amnesty will be a central issue in any transition in Zimbabwe?
Oh, it most certainly is. But what we're posing is what is going to happen. And as you rightly said at the beginning, we don't know what is going to happen. Right. It could well be that, in fact, 2017 repeats itself. There is actually the so-called military-assisted transition. And what happens within that military-assisted transition is those unaffected by this process suggest a different solution to the problems, right? The solution that was posed in 2017 was to replace one person with another. And that lesson, I think, has not been lost in the Zimbabwean public, right? The new dispensation turned out to be the same process in new clothes. It was no different. I think that has been not lost on the public, and therefore there is a deep cynicism. I hear it all over the place. That what is the end game? Is this going to mean the continuance of this process, or does it mean we're going to replace one with the other? Emerson by Chiwenga. Is that going to be the outcome? Will there be another outcome? You raised early on the notion of an NTA, and as I recall, one of the notions behind that was to pose the notion of a soft landing to avoid exactly the kind of crisis that we're in. But now we are. And when a hard landing happens, sometimes hard landings come out in ways that you don't expect. There's a very good...
I hear you. Yeah. So maybe let me turn to Tendai. And Tendai, my first, in pursuing the same theme, really, to answer why is it that Emerson Mnangagwa is so intent not just on extension of his term of office, but life presidency, I would say. is implicit in all that is being said. That he wants, like Mugabe, it looks like he wants to die in office. And maybe this backdrop, you may have heard about it, that last year, a survey, a public opinion survey was commissioned out of CRO to get the reaction of the population to the idea of 2030. And I'm told the first round, 82% of those canvassed expressed objection, abhorrence, not only to the idea of extending the term of office of Mnangagwa, but by implication even opposition to Mnangagwa himself, his person. And then there was a second survey done. This time, we believe the officers concerned were exchanged between one province and another. For example, those from Matmat South were to survey Mash East and vice versa. And the outcome was 94% of the population, or at least those canvassed, were opposed to extension, and indeed, by implication, opposed to Mnangagwa himself. Now, this is last year. In the face of that, not to mention the rumblings within ZANU-PF itself, and the recent expressions by the section of the whole veterans, why do you think, Tendai, that the Mnangagwa remains persistent, intent, almost as if he has gone for broke? Why? Tendai?
Well, thank you very much. Well, the Mnangagwa is a person, but he represents a cabal. He represents interests that want to see the 2030 agenda being played out. So he's just a pawn in a big sea of hubris and multiple agendas driven by cartels and mafia. He's just the face of that, just like Mugabe was the face of another faction that stood for something in ZANU-PF. So I'll come to these two traits. In fact, I submit that there are three central points of departures in ZANU-PF and perhaps the nation at large, and these are competing and have been competing from day one. I think that as a starting point, it is common cause that we are yet again at another defining point. We are yet again at another point of precipice. We are yet again at a point where we have to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe because it is so foreseeable. One doesn't have to be a rocket scientist to see that another implosion in 2025 is coming. The question is whether it will be a coup, a seamless one like 2017, but that is very unlikely. So I think we're heading for Armageddon. We're heading for a physical a bloodbath, if not a civil war. I think it is that much is pretty obvious. When you see the tough position that has been taken by the war veterans, when you see the divisions that are playing out in the open, Daniel Garwe running like a headless chicken across the length and breadth of Zimbabwe, defaming anything that is a name and that is opposed to him. You see different factions singing different songs at the burial of national heroes. You must know that the cockpit disorder and cockpit discohesion is amplified, and that is where we are right now. And it's amazing that history keeps on repeating itself. The thing about Zimbabwean politics is that it is cyclical. It moves in booms and slumps. But there's little capacity of self-correction. Many countries and democracy itself has got an incredible capacity of self-correction. Regrettably, the Zimbabwean situation has never been capable of self-correction. The crisis or 6 things that Tony Rila identified as elephants in the living room, Gukurahundi, the 2008 violence, Murambatsvina, the 2017 coup, the violent land reform program, the millions of people that are traumatized in Zimbabwe are all qualitative examples, qualitative evidence, qualitative exhibits of the lack of the absence of the self-correcting mechanism in Zimbabwe polity. I would argue that because of this lack of self-correction, Zimbabwe is a country in permanent crisis that goes through periodic periods of peace, periodic periods of prima facie stability, while the kettle is boiling before it explodes. And you can trace this from 1888 when the white men came and signed the Rat concession with King Lobengula. If you trace from 1888, we have never known more than 10 years without an implosion. So if you take 1888, 1896, Chimurenga, 1897, 1923, the Rhodesian vote, the Rhodesian referendum, which was actually to prevent a split amongst the settlers between those who wanted to be part of South Africa and those who wanted to be self-governing and those who wanted to be a pure colony. 1931, the Land Apportionment Act. And so soon after the Land Apportionment Act, you have the birth of black nationalism with the likes of Benjamin Burombo in Hwange, the entrance of Joshua Ngomo in the political scene, UDI, the emergence, the banning and unbanning of ZAPU, the 1963, the split in ZAPU, creating ZANU-PF, 1961, the birth of the Rhodesia Front, 1965, UDI, 1965 to 1975, 25 years of war, but inside ZANU-PF things were happening, the assassination of Herbert Chitepo in March of 1975. So these are all periods of cataleptic implosions because this country has never had capacity of self-correction. 1980 is independence, we celebrate. 2 years later, 82 to 87, there's the Gukurahundi, prima facie law, 2000 land reform program, the formation of the MDC, massive violence across the country, 2005, Operation Murambatsvina, 2008, the violence up to the run-up election, incidents like Chaona, thousands and thousands of people killed and displaced in this country. 2013 has its own story. 2017 has its own story. So you cannot find more than 10 years of peace and stability reflecting the cyclical nature of Zimbabwean politics and its lack of self-correction. What is the challenge? Why is this so? My respectively submission is that we have not had a common consensus that can drive this country. Industrialized countries have had one consensus: capitalism. Let's extract, let's make profit. The challenge with Zimbabwe is that we have never had, we've always had a fragmented consensus, a disarticulated national differences. So these differences have been huge. Take the differences in the nationalist movement. Take tribalism that the late great Masipula Stole wrote about, and which you, Sekuru Ibo, you have written about. You have written about the identity politics in the liberation movement. Take the differences arising from primitive accumulation. The corruption in this country. One can write a book about that. So I see three things at independence. I see a first group. I call it the purist group. So you belong in that group, Dr. Bandasa. People who say naively, we've gone to war, we're going to liberate our people, people are going to live in peace, stability, under a democratic black government. Very naive, but very purist. Then you have got a second group, that's where probably Mugabe belonged. We have to govern you. We liberated you, but we have a role. And the role is for a Bonapartist state that must look after its citizens. So there was a massive program of social transformation from 1980. Schools were built, hospitals were built, and so forth. So power was concentrated. Authoritarian hegemony was there, but it had a humanitarian face. It understood that we had the obligation to look after humanity and our fellow, citizens, albeit in a contradictory manner, because that same lot were killing people in Gukurahundi between 1982 and 1987. But still, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll call them this middle group, the entitlement class. The entitlement liberalism or Bonapartist will govern, but will be benevolent to you. So I think Bonapartist is a better term. Then you have got a third element, a third viewpoint now. This is an extractive component. This is an extractive component. I call them Zigananda. They have no morality. They have no ideology. They have no elasticity. Everything is open to the highest bidder. So right now, as I'm talking to you, the center of accumulation have become our commodities, which are being distributed, whether it's the rare earth, whether it's the lithium, it's just being looted left, right, and center. Chinese are digging cemeteries because of this loot. They're run by cartels. They've taken over everything. They've taken over churches. They've taken over the opposition. They've taken over even football. Recently, there were elections at Zifa, and they took over. So they've no morality at all. And this is the class that took over after 27. The class that took over after after 2017. A class with no morality at all. A class with no value system at all, a class that is completely vacuous, a class that is driven by the bottom line, power for power's sake, accumulation for the sake of accumulation, a class with no shame at all, with no guilt, what T.S. Eliot called the Wallowman. So it's a brigand class, a kakistocrat, the West amongst us, running us. So three traits: the purist view, which you belong to, the Bonapartist view, there's authoritarian consolidation, but with obligations to our people. So we'll build schools, we'll build dams, and so forth. This second group, at least, has got roots and social connections in its liberation roots. So in Kunyara, it has got some shame, it has got some limitations, it has got some elasticity, unlike the brigand group of cartels and so forth. The 2030 agenda is therefore an outcome of the failure to find a common unified consensus between these three groups of people. The 2030 agenda represents the failure of nationalism and the independent discourse. The 2030 agenda is a civil war now between the Bonapartist view in ZANU-PF and the brigand cartel view in ZANU-PF. Why does the cartel view want 2030? I agree that impunity is one of the things that they want to deal with, what Tony was talking about. They've committed crimes against humanity. They're still committing crimes against humanity. But the real issues are two. First is identity politics. If Mugabe and his tribes had it for 38 years, we and our tribe must also have this thing for 38 years. It's looting. It's nothing but looting. Edson Zobo used to say, the 23rd agenda is greed. The 23rd agenda is extraction. The 23rd agenda is looting. The 23rd agenda is primitive, accumulation. But it won't succeed. It won't succeed because the majority of Zimbabweans are at the center. They naively believe in the purist position or are in the center of the Bonapartist position. So that's why it will be resisted and it will not go anywhere. The result of the 23rd agenda is also predominantly something that you find on the African continent. But the African continent has got the same contradictions of nationalism, of you referred to the monarchical nature of power in Africa. And it's not a surprise. I mean, look at Teodoro Obiang of Equatorial Guinea, 46 years in power. Look at Denis Sassou Nguesso of the Republic of Congo, 40 years in power. Look at Yoweri Museveni, 40 years in power. Look at King Mswati of Swaziland, 40 years in power. Look at Isaiah Afwerki in Eritrea, 33 years in power. Look at Ismail Omar Guelleh in Djibouti, 27 years in power. Look at King Mohammed VI in Morocco, 26 years in power. Look at Paul Kagame in Rwanda, 25 years in power. Look at Faure Ganassibe in Togo, 20 years in power. But remember, his father had been 43 years in power at the time that he died. But the sad thing about these things, the attempt to extend the constitution, the attempt to mutilate the constitution, is that it will lead to, as I said, an implosion. The people of this country don't want. They're going to resist this. And unfortunately, if lines are crossed, the ordinary average citizen and many other people, particularly people in the state itself, they will resist this. So what is the solution? The soft landing continues to be a national transitional authority. The soft landing has to be an inclusive situation that allows this authority to take over until we can excavate a democratic platform that can allow free and fair elections to take over. In the absence of that, I can guarantee you that it will be an implosion. I'm not a prophet. What I can't predict is the casus belli, is the nature. Is it going to be a coup? Is it going to... That I can't predict, but that there will be an implosion, I will predict. And that 2025 will end in tears. That I can predict. I will stop here.
Well, before you stop, just one question, Tundai. What do you understand to be the social base of the Geza group? We appear almost unassailable. It's more than a week now.
They're appealing to the core values of the liberation movement, what I call the purist view. So they're appealing to that because that also resonates with the ordinary Wananchi in Zimbabwe, because it's about equality, it's about transparency, it's about accountability. So they're appealing to that base, and they know that that sentiment, their sentiment, and they won't be saying this if they didn't know where the army stood. They won't be saying this if they didn't know where the security forces of this country stood. So they're saying that, just like 2017, Chris Mutsvangwa and the guys that led the war veterans said brazen things because they knew where they stood. and they knew where KG6 was. So Gezi is not a fool. Gezi and those comrades are not a fool. They know that they are standing on the shoes or the arms of KG6. And that's what gives them strength. But they also know that what they're saying is resonating with the Wananji there. When we went out in the streets on the 18th of November 2017, we were not called by the army. We went because what was happening was in tandem with our own feelings that they had to be changed and that President Mugabe had to go. So we are exactly in that same vortex. We're exactly in that same vortex of 2017. The difference, however, is this. The most dangerous faction, the brigand faction of ZANU-PF, is now the one in charge. So they will not let go, unlike Mugabe in 2017. They will not resign. They will not go easily. That's why we're heading for a bloodshed in this country. It's not going to be seamless.
Yeah, but also the Geza and his group have made one demand so far, which is that Emerson Mnangagwa must go. That Mnangagwa and his cabal, as they call it, must go. But they've not indicated.
I think you must listen to.
They have not indicated what must come thereafter.
I think they have. I think they are rooting for General Chiwenga. That is so obvious. That is so obvious. That they're saying the Chiwenga must take over. But I think that Geza is a very intelligent person, and I think what he's saying is not a script. Is not his personal script. He's representing something, which is why I'm really more worried now than 2017, because 2017 was a populist expression by Chris Mutsvangwa. This is deep-rooted. This is much, much deeper. When Gezi says, we apologize for putting a Korokoza in front of you, that's a deep statement. That's a deep statement, Sekuru. So, you asked about the difference between 2017 and 2025. 2025 is deeper, is sharper, and is going to be more bloody.
Yeah. So it's a hard landing, right?
It's a hard landing. It's a hard landing. But sometimes everything has to be broken so that you can actually build afresh. So maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes everything must be broken so that you can just start afresh.
But do we stand by? Do we stand by?
No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that.
What
we can't do that.
Can you propose what should be done now?
I've already said the National Transitional Authority, soft landing.
Yes, how do you get about it? How do you go about it? Tonight, please.
We have had debates on this issue. We've had debates.
Yes, but now, right now, we are on the cusp of a new era, one might say, albeit a hard landing.
We have
to emerge out of the hard landing.
There's to be engagement with the military. There's the engagement with the security forces. There have to be engagement with ordinary citizens. The pity that there's no opposition political party to talk about, but there has to be engagement. And someone must lead. Someone must provide agency. And unfortunately, that is easier said than done.
Yeah, well, I would like you to give some thought to it. I'll come back to you. We have to discuss here now what can be done in the seconds that we find ourselves. We don't want a repeat of 2017, at least in terms of leaving things to roll on as they have. Let me get down to Jana. I hope you're not giving up. We're here with you, Jana.
Thank you, Prof. You can hear me?
I hear you very clearly.
Fantastic. I think this is a good moment for me to segue into the conversation. And in many respects, I really recognize and find myself aligning with lots of what Tony raised, and indeed some of Tendai's observations. The way I framed it for me in my head was, we are seeing a continuation of the fissures within ZANU-PF. What I am not sure about, what I can't predict, is to what extent we will see these fissures generate a real meaningful change within ZANU-PF. in a way, I was thinking about it and thinking we are seeing a cracked a Humpty Dumpty who has fallen off a wall. The question is Humpty Dumpty truly come apart, or is truly coming apart through the rebellions we are seeing from the structures and entities and actors within ZANU-PF, or Humpty Dumpty is just cracked and there are others who are going to be working to mend him and put him back together again? And that's an interesting question, I think, that I want to leave there. What we're also seeing is the lies and the narratives that emerged out of 2017 and the Second Republic narrative that ZANU-PF spoke of. If anything, 2017 and what we've experienced now confirms that guns and violence are the currency to the throne. It's important to observe that, yes, indeed, while we are seeing Geza and the war vets that are clearly and evidently a constituency that is working with. Today, I was listening to the chairperson of the War Veterans Association here in Bulawayo, where I am based. And he was also speaking very openly and overtly about the pertaining situation and clearly aligning himself with the initiative that Geza has started. And to me, I really wondered if there's no problematic there, Prof, because again, we are seeing former actors who are militarized being the ones who are positioning themselves as catalysts to change in Zimbabwe. Really, can change emerge out of within the ZANU-PF system? Is it the kind of change that Zimbabweans deserve or want? That, I think, for me, is a big question, because war veterans and the elements that are in the military and the young people within ZANU-PF who have been agents of violence against the people of Zimbabwe are the ones that we are seeing speaking out and being very vocal. And what is problematic about a violent and a militarized approach to a change process in Zim, I mean, obviously, 2017 to today, the results of what we're experiencing as a country are evidence in themselves that we have Zimbabweans struggling daily for their livelihoods. When you think things can't get any worse, they get worse. Last month, my mother and I visited one of her nieces in a suburb in Bulawayo called Emapungwane, and we found my mother's niece saying, literally meaning the only thing I have in my household is mealie meal, and that's the only thing I'm actually able to have, because we've also had a drought situation and a water situation, and so people can't even grow vegetables, which is what people sometimes would have done. Things are bad for the ordinary person. People are struggling to put food on the table, to find opportunities to make a decent living. I mean, now you are even seeing Zimra going after a woman who's selling 6 mayonnaise that she has managed to buy from a tuck shop, being asked to prove where she got it from and to pay taxes to Zimra. People are struggling to live a dignified life in this country. So clearly things are really bad. Secondly, I would say, if you have a militarized situation in Zimbabwe, learning from the region and beyond, where we have seen, you look at Sudan right now, you have 2 military generals who are fighting for control over the country. You look at Egypt right now, where you can think, oh, well, at least they're in peace. But when the military leadership took over that country, you literally have a country whose economy, 40% of the economy of Egypt is in the hands of the military. You look at Myanmar, look at even the 3 Saharan states, Mali, Burkina Faso. There's lots of celebrations about those countries across the continent, the perception that there is change. It's a deja vu for me for 2017. But I can tell you, if you talk to the citizenry in those countries, they can tell you right now about how they cannot speak out and live in absolute fear in their own country. So a militarized approach to change in Zimbabwe is not the solution. So Tendai is really right. We need to break out of this cycle in this country that change will come, one, from within ZANU-PF, which is a perception that is there, but also that change can only be effected if violence, if the military is involved. It's got to really, really be different. I was looking at some of the discussions we've had here on this platform, Prof, that you have created for us to have these important discussions, but also looking at other discussions elsewhere. We've had many propositions and proposals. We've talked about one, change coming from ZANU-PF, leveraging the opposition. I think we talked about CCC at some point, and thinking about how now that we have elements of that opposition being in parliament, can it be leveraged to drive some sort of change for the country? But we all can see how CCC literally has now been made a completely ineffective element that is now a pseudo opposition. We have talked about activating the citizenry. We have talked about the transitional government. So I really liked how you were challenging Tendai even now to say, how do we even get to that, even if we see it as a potential solution? We have talked about national dialogue. We've talked about looking to the region, looking to SADC and the African Union. But if you asked the people of Mozambique today, who trusted that SADC and the AU would intervene in their recent dynamics with the elections, it's really proof that these multilateral organizations and institutions in themselves really exist to safeguard those who rule and those who are in power, and not the ordinary people. So where do we go? What do we do? I want to profile 3 things that, for me, also really play within the recommendations that I have referred to. I think first and foremost, we cannot push for change in this country and leave the people of Zimbabwe behind. One of the things that the last decade of politics, perhaps 2 decades of politics in Zimbabwe, is that we have seen people not only lose hope, but really have a sense of that their agency, their voice, their vote, their participation does not effect any change. So we've lost faith and belief in ourselves as agents of change in our own country. This has to change. A true people's movement that is built, that brings the people of Zimbabwe together and challenges ZANU-PF's impunity, is really key. You can refer to the constitution as being an important place where the people of Zimbabwe have put their aspirations down. We can even refer to the Zimbabwe We Want document that the churches led and engaged in discussions across the country. And we have documents, but I agree with Tendai, we lack a common consensus. We do not have shared national aspirations because we are so polarized and we are caught up in binary politics in Zimbabwe. We have to break binary politics where it's either ZANU-PF and another, ZANU-PF and Zoom, ZANU-PF and MTC, ZANU-PF and CCC. So we keep on wondering what then the next ZANU-PF end is going to be like. We need to break that. We need to dilute polarization. Surely there are things about the well-being of this country, the progress, the development of this country, the dignity of the people of this country we can agree to. I think we are a silent majority and we are allowing not even the 1%, but the 0.0001% to be so loud that we all end up thinking that they are such a massive force. So I really think that we really have to reactivate the agency of ordinary Zimbabweans. But also for that to happen, each individual in Zimbabwe really has to take 100% accountability for where we are so that they can give 100% of themselves to participate in the change that we are seeking. We did it, Prof, in the late 90s when we birthed the National Constitutional Assembly and worked through that organ and drove the processes of a new constitution in Zimbabwe. It was done when the MTC got formed. It can be done again. I think the second thing that I also think is really important is that right now, even if ZANU-PF imploded today and really fragmented today, is there an organized alternative that we can turn to and look to work with, to come in and be engaged so that they can even be in this transitional government, for instance, as Tendai is referring, or even can be formed into a platform that can be perceived as an alternative. I really think there needs to be a catalyzation of what I call progressive forces. You know, there was a time it was obvious who the good guys and the bad guys are. And of course, on both sides, there always were problematics. No side was perfect. But there was no confusion of understanding which actors we would look to say, when we want progress, democratic good for the country, development for the country, equity for the country, equality, inclusion, this is where you go. But right now, we don't seem to be clear and to know who that is and where that is. And that is something that has to change. There really needs to be a catalyzation of what I'm calling progressive actors to find a way of coming together through dialogue and really helping drive, catalyze some process that helps us have alternative views in this country about the future of this country and the future of the people of Zimbabwe. They have to be people of competence so that they are really able to challenge ZANU-PF. I am here to make a very clear call, Prof, an open call to the Church of Zimbabwe to intervene. I am really quite convinced that right now, as a people where we lack opposition parties, where we lack a civil society that is strong, competent, and is not polarized and divided, that we turn to the Church of Zimbabwe. Because even I think the last Mpoi a survey indicated that the one institution that the people of Zimbabwe trusted the most was the church. The church needs to emerge. The church in this instance needs to represent for us the good guys. Well, we hope they're the good guys because they wear the collar and they represent something that is bigger than us. We definitely need tensions to be toned down, because any implosion in ZANU-PF and any violence that is going to erupt out of the current internal struggles within ZANU-PF are going to be played out on ordinary people's lives. So it's really important that tensions are toned down. But I think the church also needs to arise to a moment of courage and brevity. They cannot be neutral any longer. They have to take sides with ordinary men and ordinary women and ordinary boy and girl. They need to seal and feel that the church is on their side. I mean, there are some things that are really clear. One, the issue of constitutionalism, it should really be a no-brainer. 2030, even if it's perceived not to be a call to third term, is intending to be a betrayal of the Constitution of Zimbabwe and the spirit of the Constitution. So that is a very clear side that can be stood with. And I said earlier on, we literally cannot allow the military to be the catalyst for change in this country. The military belongs in the barracks and only can come out of the barracks if there are other forces outside Zimbabwe that threaten us. The security forces in this country, be they CIO, be they police, be they PAX officers and whatnot, ought to be there to safeguard the people and the assets of Zimbabwe and not to find themselves to be used against the ordinary people of Zimbabwe. You talk about betrayal. We have a region to look at. Right now, look at what is going on in the DRC. Let's learn from the region. I'm not looking to SADC. I'm not looking to the AU, but I'm looking at the betrayal of leaders and governments. And I did a good job of even articulating for many who have remained in power using hard force to keep their power. And so I want to appeal to the church today that the church needs to rise. This is a critical moment in the history of this nation for leadership to arise. And I think the church can help us catalyze some of these processes that I'm talking about. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks, Jana. Thanks for a wonderful presentation. I think you have helped to bring things together. And I think we need to take note here. And before I carry on, I just want to tell our audience that you can intervene through chats. There's a provision for that. Please come on board, join the discussion. One of the things that you have raised, Jana, which is really both a reflection of the reality that we're in, but one which we have to move quickly, as you have indicated, get away from. The extent to which the militarization, as you called it, has become a catalyst of politics in our country. I don't know if you're aware that in 2017, the coup was sold on the basis of a proposed government of national unity. My source is no longer here, Mr. Debengo, but I'm told the proposal was to have Mnangagwa as president, and then Dumiso Dabengwa and Joyce Mujuru as the two vice presidents, and Morgan Tsvangirai as the prime minister. I'm told to the extent that this model was sold explains why Morgan Tsvangirai rushed from his hospital bed in South Africa and made himself present at the inauguration. And likewise, Joyce Mujuru and many of the MDC leaders, including Shamisa, were at the inauguration, and I've never been able to establish why and how that model was spurned, and then there was a direct involvement of the military in government, as we saw with first of all SB Moyo and Prince Shiri in the first lineup of cabinet, and then subsequently Chiwenga himself. Now, whether we need to examine that conjuncture, was it the dominant nature of the military at the time in our politics that spurned something which I believe in the background had been found to be the solution, another GNU, so to speak, in those circumstances? And if so, are we having history repeat itself? In other words, in the way Tendai has answered that, basically the outpourings by Geza and his colleagues is implicitly a call for Chiwenga to take over from Mnangagwa, which will be a continuation of the militarization that you spoke about. Is there any way that we can use the catalytic role of the military, which we cannot avoid in the circumstances, which we were not able to avoid in 2017? Is there any way we can use this catalytic of the military towards a better tomorrow, something that will bring about a democratic order, in which I mean an accountable executive, a vibrant legislature, and a fiercely independent judiciary? Is there somewhere we can? You suggested maybe the church should play its role. I was in another discussion 2 weeks ago today, and the point was made that the church should take leadership. But as usual in our discussions, we never conclude our discussions with very solid conclusions as way forward. Is there any way you could suggest, Jana, as to how the church could become a key factor at this juncture that we find ourselves. We are, no doubt, on the eve of another coup, possibly, or hard landing, as Tendai has indicated, in that those in power, Mnangagwa and those close to him, are not going to go quietly, not as quietly as Mugabe went, and that we might be in for a hard landing. Is there anyway one, if I may put it to you, one, is there any way we can avoid bloodshed, the imminent bloodshed? Is there any way we can avoid loss of life? And with an alternative that includes a national dialogue. That's not too late. We cannot. I don't believe that we can stand by and watch us descend into violence, and we don't want anyone dead in our country. Is what do you suggest?
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. I'll tease out, two things, and perhaps my other colleagues on the panel can also have other wisdom to share. As you were speaking about this contingent and the outspokenness of Geza, I really also really believe that the Geza remnant contingent is very much aligned to the Chiwenga faction and efforts and fights within ZANU-PF. And I'm reminded that in the early 2000s, it was Chiwenga who came out clearly speaking, if you recall, Prof, that they would not salute or serve any leader as the military of Zimbabwe that had not been part of the liberation struggle, if you remember, which in itself is a very dangerous narrative and framework to operate from. Except of course if he has changed his mind with the experiences he has had since he retired from the military, but I would hardly think so. So I'm really concerned, I think, about that alignment and those collaborations and working with those elements to try and explore any progressive change. I would really think it would end up in the way that it happened in 2017, where you think we're going along, but you're actually being used to legitimate something. And when it really then matters, you then get excluded and so forth and so on. So that would be my huge concern. Why I'm calling on the church, it was as if Tony and I coordinated, and I promise you we didn't. I studied the various dialogues and engagements across Zimbabwe since Lancaster House. And in each stage, when the country has gone through rumblings, the church has been the voice of reason. 1979, when the Lancaster House Constitution and talks were taking place, you had the church present, represented at that time by the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, priests who were present. When Gukurahundi happened in the early 80s in Matebeleland, again, it was the church that intervened and engaged both Nkomo and Mugabe to really get them to get to a place where they had to take positions that safeguard the lives of the people of Zimbabwe. I talked about the National Constitutional Assembly. Again, the idea fermented and emerged out of the Zimbabwe Council of Churches. So again, the church. When you talk about, I talked about the Zimbabwe we want, you talk about even when the GNU was happening, the church was shuttling across the different political groups, helping progress conversations at that time. We can go back to the history of this nation, and I can account and do my own presentation on each of the different key moments of this country. We have seen the church engage. it's not a perfect church. I'm not meaning everybody who calls themselves church. Of course, we know there are fake actors out there. But we have organized bodies, the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, the Catholic Bishops' Conference. What I also love about these organized bodies, they've created a platform, the Zimbabwe Heads of Christian Denominations, that brings 4 bodies of organized churches, including indigenous churches, to work together to progress issues of the nation. So when I'm talking about the church, that's who I'm referring to. And I think this is a moment they can come, bring actors together across the political divide, across the different spheres of this nation, across geography, across gender, across interests, to begin to have a discussion. For me, I do think there ought to be a discussion with only those I call the progressive forces, because to really think everybody can go in to engage with ZANU-PF equally is kidding and lying to ourselves. There needs to be an alternative platform, voices, actors that can present the other half of the nation that has clearly and consistently showed since the 90s that they want a different kind of leadership and rulership in this country. ZANU-PF does not speak for everybody in this country. So we do need an alternative of that nature. For me, that's where I would suggest the church starts. But again, in the pews of all these church platforms are ZANU-PF members and leaders. And so they're actually the best ones to bring all the actors together. That's the best way I can say, Prof.
Yes, on our part, both as a policy dialogue and the platform for concerned citizens, we have tried, we have had dialogue with the church. Significant was, I don't know, Tony can remind us, remember the National Convergence Platform? I think you were there, Jana, and it was held at the ZCC in Hatfield. It offered great promises, but it petered out because of no clear, first of all, the church itself was not in unison. When you call the church is made up of many denominations, and indeed many personalities therein. It was not in unison, nor was civil society in agreement as to what national dialogue meant. And so the NCP initiative, which is a grand occasion, if you recall, in Hatfield, with almost 1,000 people assembled there, with the church in the leadership, the ZCC, and it came to naught. And more recently, as I said, 2 weeks ago, there was a discussion on the X platform, organized by the Teachers Union, ATUS, and with some very brilliant contributions from the audience, in the form of some former MPs, activists, who all agreed at the end that the church must take the initiative. It's a fortnight since, and we have seen nothing. So how do we get the church to take the lead? I don't want to confine the discussion to Jana. Both Tendai and Tony can come in here as a way forward. How do we, if we agree, one, that we cannot allow the political process, the trajectory, to remain confined to the realm of ZANU-PF alone. 2, that you cannot allow a situation where the military, our country becomes a military state ad nauseum. And 3, that we must begin somewhere towards a national dialogue, a conference of all stakeholders, and more important, the beginnings of a national transitional authority, which resets the Zimbabwean process by saying that we are having a transitional government for 2 or 3 years, during which Zimbabwe reforms, the state is reformed politically and economically before the next elections. So maybe I'll give Jana a rest, but please don't get away. We still need you. Tony, you want to say something? And then Tendai?
Thank you, Ibo. Thank you, Jana. I mean, this is going in a very interesting way. As somebody who pushed the notion of a transitional authority for 9 years now, the single question we've got from everybody, nationally, except maybe for Tendai, and regionally, is this is the right answer to a country that cannot reform politically or economically. But what would bring the state to agree? That's the crunch question. Now, Jana's raised the question of the churches, and we in the Platform for Concerned Citizens have engaged the church. We engaged them over the Sabbath, the National Convergence Platform. What was a singular problem, and I'm going to elaborate this a little bit, was what does a national dialogue lead to? What's the end state? Where are you going with this? Bringing everybody to talk is good, but the reality is Zimbabweans, as both Tendai and Jana have pointed out, have lost faith in the state. They don't trust the government, they don't trust political parties, they don't trust the agents of the state. The only people they trust fundamentally are NGOs and the churches. That's a fact. But both of those groups have no articulate solution for the way forward, right? So when you pose polarization, Team A versus Team B or Team C or Team D, the answer is, what's the alternative to that? And the alternative for that must be some kind of goal for why you bring people together. Now, Jana raised the NCA and so did Tendai. What was critical about the NCA was it had a goal, a new constitution. Dialogue is not a goal, it's a process. The churches need to specify the solution in clear terms. And those terms are really very simple in the end for Zimbabweans. And by the way, remember that the South Africans did this without Lancaster House or anything. And they did it themselves because it was an agreement that the situation had got so bad that we had to find ourselves together. Now, that was a political party in the state, and it was all the formations outside the state. It was the ANC, the PAC, Weekly, and the Mass Democratic Movement. They said there must be a dialogue, and the dialogue must lead to this. And that was the important thing. So what's missing? So when you say to the churches, what are you going to do? Put the vision in front of the people. This is what we want you to advocate. Provide leadership. So leadership is not saying, let's all go and talk. Leadership is saying, let's talk to get to that result. That's the crunch question.
But Tony, get to the point. How do we go forward? But before you,
how do we go forward? The churches,
there's a complaint here. There's a complaint. I don't think I understood you to mean that, but there's an observation by someone. We just sent a note. Tony Rila's endorsement of the 2017 abuse and violence in violation of Section 212 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe by the Army, and his claim that the current 2030 situation warrants a similar intervention by the Army under Section 212 of the Constitution are breathtakingly outrageous. Did you endorse?
I can answer that very, very simply. The coup makers created a mechanism for another coup. I'm not supporting it. I'm saying that's the most dangerous thing that ever happened in our country, was to say that the military have the right to intervene in civilian affairs.
Your point. Okay.
Right. So my other point, to go back to that, is that's what you have to do, is you have to subvert that.
Yeah.
Tendai,
come in now on the transition authority. How do we proceed? We have the point from Jana, and I endorse that maybe the church is about the best agency right now, to lead us into a transitional authority? How would you propose we go about it tonight?
Yeah, look, these are, we've had, we probably had 3 or 4 of the surface dialogues just on this point.
Yes.
Just on this point, yeah. So I agree that the church must play a leading role, and I agree on the purity of the church. In saying so, I'm not giving a clean bill of health to every church, but we know that there are institutions that can be trusted. There are institutions in the church that have been with us and with the people for a long time that can be trusted, and not some of these gospel pronouns that are building mansions all over. So I think we know what we're talking about. So the church must play a leading role, but everyone is a shareholder, everyone is a stakeholder. So what you guys have been trying to do is so key. Part of our problem in Zimbabwe is that we lack the agency, agency. It's not there, and we tend to delegate. We tend to outsource the things that all of us have to do. It's a collective challenge, and we have to come together. The beauty of the process is we did in 1999, 2000, the National Working People's Convention that led to the formation of the MDC, the no vote that we led in 2000, was that there was agency everywhere. And every citizen knew that I have to stand up to authoritarian consolidation and so forth. That is missing right now. That is missing right now. There is a suffocation of fatalism. The poverty has become so endemic that matters of day-to-day reproduction have become so important. I was listening to Jana to say she visited with her mom. Some community in Bulawayo where the citizens were saying we're going to have sadza with sadza. I know that people are surviving on town. 4 leaves of vegetable. Cooking fat and a small bowl of mealie meal. 9-year-old children are selling their bodies so that the household can survive. Suburbs like Epworth are crime scenes because of the bohemianism, the prostitution, motivated by the fact that people have to reproduce themselves. So that fatalism is driving people underground. And also we've got false gods and false cultures. People that believe they can become millionaires without working, without being able to write their names. We have got charlatans going around distributing all kinds of goods and materials and vehicles. So it's the basement is probably worse than the physical damage that ZANU-PF is done. And when we build a new society, it's not the physical building, it's not the GDP that will cause a problem to us. It's how do we salvage this population that has become so fatalistic, so hopeless, and so arrested in a false value system that think that certain pot-bellied individuals are heroes in this society. So yes, the church can lead, but everyone must provide agency. And unfortunately, that's where I see the problem is. I looked at Mozambique a few months ago. It was burning. And it was not Vinicius who was leading that. He was not even in the country. It was ordinary people who said no to the corrupt rule of Frelimo. And right now, Mozambique is ungovernable. Chapo, can't handle that country because the Mozambicans don't want Frelimo. And that fact, and the people took agency by going on the streets in Maputo, in Beira, in Chimoyo, and all the major towns of Mozambique, because the people put agency. Here is Dololo, it's nothing.
Yeah. Let's get the screen on the NTA on the screen, and then maybe while it's there, we can talk to it, Tendai and Jana. Can you get back the one page? We have had a lot of interventions on X, on social media generally. People are expressing concern that we cannot have a repeat of 2017, where militarization of the state continues unabated. That even if we have the military and the war veterans being a catalyst for change, that change must mean a return to a constitutional and democratic rule necessarily. So there is the document in front of us. The establishment of a transitional arrangement such the proposed national is predicated on several crucial first steps. First, a mediated political settlement, a concurrent inclusive national dialogue, a national conference. How do we get there? Is it possible through this forum here and now to recommend how those three steps can begin? A mediated political settlement, a concurrent inclusive national dialogue, and towards a national conference. Now, last year we had moved quite far. As Tendai has indicated, we have had several discussions on this platform. And it even planned the idea of a national conference, but came to naught because things have been moving faster than us. Where now we have again the development within ZANU-PF itself being the would-be catalyst for change, whatever change that might mean. So, Jana, you want to say something? Is there any way we can approach the church, and who in the church can we approach to lead a mediated political settlement and a national dialogue?
That's an easy one to answer, and very quickly for me, I would say, where I would refer to the church, I would say let's start with the Zimbabwe heads of Christian denominations, because it brings together the four largest organized Christian bodies that are accountable to each other within their system. And I think right now the president is Bishop Mparuta and the Secretary General is Reverend Domingos of the ZCC. So there is a body that you can actually engage. However, the political analyst in me takes another step back to say, does the climate for this exist in the country? And I think that's the big question. Because what we are seeing are fissures within one entity, ZANU-PF, but even then, we are really still to see to what extent those fissures can take root. And if I use the terminology of agency that I spoke about earlier on, and that Tenda is also echoed, is there enough agency within actors who are dissenting within ZANU-PF to actually cause a real, volcanic explosion within ZANU-PF? But it cannot just be within ZANU-PF, because if we are wanting this transitional authority, which is something I also really believe is something that Zimbabwe actually needs to get to the Zimbabwe we want, there has got to be acceptance by those who are in power today that things are really not good and they no longer alone can get there. I don't know if the climate is yet right, and I think that's my only reaction so far.
All I can say, among those around Geza, though not Geza himself specifically, because I've not had any discussion with him, but in previous discussions over the years, some of those who were in this company of Geza, mainly the former Zipa people like Chipoera, for example, have expressed an interest in the NTA and they've discussed with us. So one can say, and Tendai did make a point earlier on, that one has to open discussions with the military. And there are progressive forces within the military, no doubt about that, who will understand that it is not ideal for any country to remain under military rule. We must gravitate quickly towards a democratic dispensation, away from which should include, in my view, curing the coup, to use Tony Rilla's term. Curing the coup, in other words, dispensing with the likes of the Chiweshe judgment, which justified a coup. That must be rectified, surely. And so that the transitional process itself which should include necessarily a process whereby we return to constitutionalism through the cure of the coup. Yeah, Tony, you want to come in?
Thank you, Ibo. On those first 3 bullet points, they're not simultaneous. They're a process. And picking up on what Jana said, I think the first step is to ask the churches to convene a national conference. The national conference is... Hello? Can you hear me?
Tony, you disappeared.
Can you hear me?
I would say
Tony, I think it's you, Prof.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it
so,
me?
right. This is a process. We're trying to institute a process to deal with a hard landing, to provide a soft landing, as Tendai pointed out.
Tony, move closer to your router.
Yeah, I'm here. They can hear
Tony,
me, Ibo.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
You're breaking.
No, I think it's your end, not mine. Okay.
Mine? No.
Okay, I'm just going to carry on. Okay. So start somewhere. Start with the churches taking the leadership to say, we're bringing the people together, as we did in the NCA, with a goal. The goal is we want a mediated political settlement, and we want a concurrent inclusive national dialogue. Because the first national dialogue is not going to be the political parties and inclusivity. It's going to be the people. So bring us together. Let's discuss a goal. This is what we want. We're not messing about with this. We're not interested in changing the bums on the seat, excuse my French people. We're interested in a transformational process. This is how you get to an NTA. What the format looks like, and there's some suggestions there that we've been proselytizing for 9 years, but that's what comes out of a mediated political dialogue to get the political parties to agree to a concurrent national inclusive dialogue. That's what we do, right? So we say to the churches, call us, we'll come, but we won't do an NCP where we just ask for a national conference. We're saying we want this. Just as we said in the 90s, we want a new constitution. There must be a goal. So if there's no goal, why would people who totally distrust everybody bother to support it? They have to have a vision, and the churches can provide the vision, and they can provide the leadership. And from everything we've heard, from the Liberators platform, from soldiers talking on behalf of the military, have said the people have had enough. They want a vision. So give them a vision, and the churches provide it, and that will work, I believe. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Jana? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Tony, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Tendai, you want to come in? Maybe your last word for the evening, Tony, Tendai?
Yeah, I think that Jana asks a valid question on bridging current mood with the NCA, so with the NTA. I think the bridge and the immediate thing that needs to be done is the creation of a coalition against the mutilation of the Constitution. So everyone is speaking in defense of the Constitution, but we don't have an organized body to do that. We lost the NCA for whatever reason. So I think that the immediate task of Democrats is basically to let's create something that we can coalesce in defense of the Constitution against the attempt to amend Section 328 or the backdoor attempt now to so-called extend the term of Parliament to 2030. That agenda is imperative, and it's an agenda that the church can easily lead. Now, I think we need to attend to that this immediate issue, the threat to the Constitution by the cabal, the mafia, and the cartels.
That's the first one. Can you add a second one? To engage progressive forces to avoid bloodshed in our country through dialogue.
Protect the citizens, protect the Constitution, protect the citizen.
Yes. Okay. Tony, your last word.
When the purists, as Tendai said, are objecting to the subversion of the things that they did in the 1970s to free us, say it has been completely and utterly subverted. We know that there's a group, and we're all, probably not me, but you, Ibo, and others, know throughout the country that people know that the goals of what people struggled for have been violated. And we know that comprehensively in 2025. There's a deep feeling in the country that we have been betrayed for our aspirations. We can build on that. That's what they have articulated. And that's why the proposal to lead to a national conference by the churches is important, because those voices are the voices that will change us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Jana, last but not least, if you can suggest how we can get from here, what do we do? How do we begin convene this coalition, which will also attend to the need for dialogue that will also preempt bloodshed in our country and move to eventually towards the authority?
You should have asked the hard question to a former minister and to the wise old men with white hair that are on the panel with me. I just want to say my last words, Prof. I really do believe what I recommended, because I've also really been thinking about it, as I said, that I really think we need to be catalyzed into action. We need to remind Zimbabweans of their agency. Just before Kofi Annan passed away, he said a statement that has inspired me. He said, when the leaders fail to lead, let the people lead, and the leaders will follow. We need to bring Zimbabweans back to a place where they believe in themselves and their country, away from personalities, because part of what has been really terrible with Zimbabwean politics of late has been focusing on personalities and not the issues. And I really want to believe that my bishops, the leaders of the churches, when we approach them, Prof, and we can talk offline, that we really have a real conversation with them about this seminal moment where we are calling on them to rise to their calling. And let's start there. Let's start there.
Thanks, Jana. I've not much to say in summing up, except to highlight the following. The discussion here highlighted first and foremost the outrageous nature of this proposal of 2030. That not only within ZANU-PF is there discord about it, but throughout the country. And I made reference to the survey which was done, which we got to know through our own sources, was done to show that basically the population at large are opposed to it. Not just ZANU-PF, the population at large are opposed to it and are not happy about the current situation in the country. And thirdly, that we are now on the verge of, or as Tendai called it, a precipice. That unlike 2017, where there was relatively a bloodless coup, that this time around we are heading for bloodshed unless something is done very urgently. And this discussion today is one such that is designed to see how we can find a way out of a bloody end to this conflict that's already erupted within ZANU-PF itself, and that we need to put something in place. And Jana has made a recommendation that we engage the church and other sectors of society. And I was going to propose that maybe right now the four of us put something to paper which summarizes the discussion and highlights the recommendations, that this be made public, published widely in the media and on social media included, in the diaspora, as a clarion call to save our country, a clarion call to avoid hard landing, a clarion call for a transitional authority as a necessary mechanism, necessary agency towards a better tomorrow in Zimbabwe. If you agree, I will then declare the meeting closed and ask that Tony and I tomorrow, and with your help, Jana and Tendai, put something on paper, a very brief thing that goes out to the media and across the Zimbabwean diaspora as a clarion call on this 11th hour, one might call it, because we do sense that we're heading for some turbulent times.
Yeah.
On that note, I want to thank you again.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to thank you again, Tendai, for coming in as you did. Jana, out there in Escodini. Siyabonga siswami. Thank you very much. Tony, thank you very much for helping to put this together. And thank you very much. And David in the background, thank you. And all those who have joined us. We had a very good turnout, almost 200 people already here on this platform, 200. And many, many more on YouTube. And as our technician says, the discussion has gone viral, and not surprisingly, this is a very tense moment for this country. And we couldn't just be observers. We need to become participants, but in a very positive way, of avoiding violence. We've had enough violence in our country. No more. Thank you.
That's true.
Who would you expect?